I think we're live now.
We are live. I'm sorry. I thought Liz was going to make a few comments first, but welcome everyone. I'm Margaret Flowers. I'm the Director of Popular Resistance and part of the Backbone Campaign Board. And I want to welcome you to our panel discussion following the viewing of the amazing film, The Race to Save the Planet, and by Joe Gantz. And we're very honored today to have Joe here, as well as several of the people that were featured in the film. This is a critically important film at this moment in time, when we're suffering the impacts of the climate crisis. And I think, empowering people to understand that they have the power to take action and have an impact is so critical. And this film does a beautiful job of showing how ordinary people can do extraordinary things and move outside of their comfort zone. So I look forward to the discussion today so that we can continue to build on that theme. And I wanted to open with a question. Of course, you can ask questions and those will be given to me and I'll be able to ask those of the panelists. But to begin, I wanted to begin with Joe Gantz and just say, can you talk a little bit about why this film and what do you hope to achieve with it?
Well, hello, everybody. I made this film. Of course, I wanted to make a film that dealt with climate change and drew attention to this existential crisis. But I felt that at this juncture, many of the films that were being made about climate change felt like they needed to tell people how bad things are and how much worse they're going to get. I feel like in the early years, people didn't know a lot of that, but now that information is sort of in the ether and people have a real strong sense of that. And when these films keep coming out with all those statistics, I feel that they're overwhelming to people and depressing and all true, but I felt that I would like to make a film that was uplifting, inspiring, and just kind of something that would, energize people to get in the streets and make their voices heard for a livable future. And so that's why I made the film.
And you're hoping then that it will inspire more people.
Well, I felt that by following people who are kind of in the trenches, who have this unbelievable passion to fight climate change. And also I wanted people who were sort of everyday heroes. I'm not people who are super wealthy, connected, famous, but people who, in spite of the difficulties of being an activist, that it can get in the way of making a living, it can get in the way of some of your most important relationships, that, in spite of all that, they just were compelled to do anything and everything they could. And I think that people watching this film, will say, like, if, Aji age 15, if Miriam age 72, or if Bill, Abby, and Michael in between can do what they're doing, then I can do something. And, now is the time where everybody has to take action and just get involved and do anything they can to try to turn this around.
Thank you. And Michael, you took a very big step in your life by taking the action as a valve turner. You were the only one of the 5 valve turners that ended up spending time, in prison as a result of that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how has your life changed since then? What sorts of impacts, both positive and negative, has, moving out of your comfort zone and taking that big step of direct action, what impact has it had on you?
That's a good question. I think that it's been tough because that was kind of a mountaintop experience, really, shutting off the Keystone 1 pipeline. And I think in the film I say, for a moment there I was on the right side of history. The rest of the time, I'm like everybody else. I'm kind of over here on the wrong side of history, trying to figure out what the hell do we do now? So it's tough. It's tough. And I hear it a lot from a lot of activists that people are confused and and struggling. And so I think I've been confused and struggling a lot. Yeah, with just what is it that's needed, where to put the energy. I know there's a lot of great projects going on. I know Backbone is doing a lot of great work, and it's hard because we're out of time and because it feels like nothing is enough. And we are so out of time. And now we've got the Biden presidency and we've got the Green New Deal, and so much of it is just empty air. So it's hard. It's one thing to fight a Trump, who will come out and tell you that they want to drill, baby, drill. And it's a different thing when, the people are saying, yeah, we're fighting climate change. Everybody go home. We got this. So anyway, that's kind of, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
It did to some extent, but I think, good wisdom there. It does make it more difficult. In this current environment, as we're not seeing that push to the left.
Well, and a critical piece was that we shut down existing pipelines. We shut down existing production. And that's where we have to go. In my particular mind, I think if we're shutting down new pipelines, which, you got to shut down line 3, right? You got to stop that. But if we're stopping new production, we're actually playing defense. And we're not playing offense until we're shutting down refineries, until we're shutting down the consumption. So, and that's when we'll see real progress. And I don't know if any of the groups are ready to. I mean, DAPL is flowing, but yeah, it's a tough thing to imagine. Like people actually saying, okay, we're going to shut down this oil refinery is not going to run anymore. That sounds like a fairy tale, but that's what has to happen.
Yeah. Abby, a similar question to you. Kind of how has the action that you took impacted your life? How has it changed things for you? Any positives or negatives that you can share from that experience?
Well, after doing that action, I think Rising Tide continued on with a direct action in a certain way. And then kind of people were reabsorbed in other groups, many of the groups that are probably watching this. I really felt the challenge to try to inspire those that would be unlikely participants, and that meaning like my church family, and that was really difficult because I think they all said, oh, look at what she did, she's our gal, when really I had to say, you cannot be taken off the hook. Like we all have to do something. And so it's not fair for you to say, I'm the person doing this, so I don't have to do anything. And so that was a big, like through preaching and through constantly, even today during the climate service we had, that was mentioned again. And I constantly have to like reiterate the fact that, science says we have 2 generations left. So, we have to all act. Just a handful of activists can't do it alone. And I hate the word activist. The other thing about the action was, in my training, it was like, don't talk to the police, and don't in jail, don't talk about your action or anything like that. I did absolutely everything that I was not supposed to do. So when I was arrested, the police officer, Officer Mars, buckled me in, and I saw in his hand he had 3 bracelets that were made by kids, and they had girls' names on them. And in the car, driving to the jail, City Hall first, he was so amazed and moved and transformed when he saw the support people for our action, like cheering and crying and all the support that they were doing throughout the action. So it wasn't just me, it was this huge, large group of people that had to put on this action. And he was so moved that he talked about how in Everett, there weren't these actions happening. People weren't doing things since way long ago. And he was so proud of how well our action, respectful it was. And I still follow him, and same with the judge. Like I'm Facebook friends with him. He watched the film. He says he still thinks about our trial very often. Like it made a huge impact in him. And even the railroad workers, like Bill and I are in a solidarity group with the railroad workers. So like, I feel like the work that I'm doing now is a little more, not as flashy, and it's quieter, and it's behind the scenes, and it's a little more frustrating. So I think all the work is needed. I have the itch to get out there after seeing like Extinction Rebellion and all that they're doing, and the people in this film, and all this going on, like you said, with Line 3 and Kinder Morgan, just all of the stuff. So I feel like that balance of like getting out there and then stepping aside and having other people fill that, support them. So that's where I'll say.
Yeah, great points. And Bill, you and I have worked together for a long time. We've made some good trouble together in the past as well. And you are just a really brilliant strategist and movement analyst. And I was wondering if you could kind of share with the audience today your thoughts on the role of direct action in social transformation, and particularly you specialize in spectacle actions. So the importance of using actions in addition to stopping things, but also to raise awareness, if you could talk about that.
Well, thank you, Margaret. Yes, we've had a lot of fun making good trouble. So, a lot of the other comments, spur on ideas. Like I realized, it was during the Obama administration that we did the Shall No action, right? He was about to go to, he was planning a trip to Alaska at the end of his towards the end of his second term. And he wanted to be the climate president. And so we exposed the mismatch between what he was actually allowing to happen and what his identity was. So I don't think that who's in the White House should matter. There's always been plenty to oppose with Democrats or Republicans, and plenty to propose. So I do think that there is a real phenomenon, obviously, that happens, like similar to the anti-war movement disappearing, even though the wars did not disappear at the end of the Bush administration. So I think those are all valid sort of warnings that we should be taking into account. Another thing that was inspiring to me when hearing people discuss this was thinking back to the origins of Backbone Campaign, which was really just some friends getting together for potlucks, thinking about, well, what can we do? And so, like, if anything, that's Michael, right? Because I think Michael's challenge and Abby's, frustration with the word activist and not letting people off the hook, I think that's really valid. There's only so much you can ask of people, right? We all have ebbs and flows in the energy that we can bring to this work. And so we need everybody to take their piece and do something, do something. I've learned through Backbone Campaign that rebellion is a muscle that needs to be exercised. None of us like leaning into that discomfort of disobedience of one sort or another, and so we have to enter into what's a challenging space just to cross the threshold of our comfort, but do it in a really centered place. And I think that helps to do that with friends. So I would also hope that COVID would have instructed us in a way that about the importance of our relationships and the sacredness of our connection to land and the time we spend with our loved ones and our homes, our gardens and all that, so that, we're not really seeking a new, going back to normal, but we want a new normal. And a new normal maybe slowed down, maybe we consume less, maybe we care more about our relationships, and maybe we harness those relationships. Maybe we decolonize our time, of like how we're part of the capitalist, trance, and we extricate ourselves. Like I was in another conversation earlier this week about, and it reminded me of how labor used to have marching bands and choir contests and these sorts of things. So you started it wasn't just that you got together to do actions, No, you got together to do band. You know, you did food together. You know, there's so like making change and making trouble doesn't have to be the only thing we do with our the people we love, but it should be something that we do with them. And I think that you see, like in the UK's Extinction Rebellion, one of the things that really came out for me watching their work as they were celebrating and watching our work was all the variations, all the beautiful little pieces that people were taking on, from the people who bring out the washing machine and to get out the dirty laundry, and I mean all kinds of really creative action. So I used to have a button that said action is the antidote to despair, and I think that this is a really good time for people to talk with their friends and not accept going back into the old normal, but go back to a new normal and figure out what's the creative thing you can do, and how can you be a solutionary? How can you not just oppose, but propose, and how can you not participate in something that we participated in before? So that's a lot, but that's my initial thought about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think those are important points, and you really raise the importance of building community. You know, we're constantly trying to grow the movement and deepen our relationships and our connections so that we can do this together, and the importance of really the two-pronged strategy. And I think, you know, Michael kind of alluded to this as well, but it's the importance of not just stopping the harmful practices, the harmful things, but we also have to be building the alternatives that are going to replace that. So as we're shutting down the refineries, you know, shutting down the pipelines, we also have to be building, you know, our local food sovereignty and our local energy, and how are we going to reduce consumption, but and not letting the big guys off the hook either, right?
Right. And so things like a community land trust for housing, sort of I keep saying decolonize, but in a way it's like decolonizing our lives and our time and our debt and our money and our anxiety from that system. So whatever we can do to pull ourselves out of that liberates people to be co-authors of their future. And that's obviously, and my energy is definitely, though of course Backbone Campaign is still supporting creative action around the country and all of that. You know, a lot of what excites me right now is the Solutionary Rail project and the idea of proposing what is an infrastructure that that serves the public good rather than just corporate greed.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and the importance of, just one other point from what everybody had said, is just the importance that anybody can take action. Not everybody has to climb a tripod or shut off a valve, but, you know, or make a documentary, but everybody can find what their particular talent is, and how do you plug that into the movement in some way? Because there's a lot of different roles, and even when somebody does direct action, you have that whole support team that you talked about, Abby. You know, your jail support, your people that are doing the messaging, and people that are doing the media, and all these different roles that I have to play. So some of the questions that are coming in are really asking, you know, now that we have the Biden presidency and he's talking, you know, the pro-climate talk, but, you know, we know that he's still a president who's well, our whole system that he's part of, it's not just him, is a system that's dominated by money and corporate power. But he is using this, you know, pro-climate rhetoric. How do each of you feel now that we have this administration, and where do you think people should be directing their efforts? And Joe, why don't I start with you again?
Well, I feel encouraged that we have Biden. And, you know, I think that he has said some good things lately, which I would like to acknowledge. I know that he can't do any of this alone, and Congress, especially the Republicans, are going to do anything they can to stop it. I think that if you look at it, the majority of people in this country and around the world know that climate change is affecting our lives now and is going to get much, much worse if we don't act immediately. But the majority of politicians, certainly in this country, are doing nothing because they're in the pocket of fossil fuel or doing little. The majority is not on board. And we need the majority of the politicians. And the only way I feel that that's going to happen is if enough people get into the streets and put the pressure on the politicians to get on board. And unless and until I think that we can create that sort of momentum and that sort of focus, I don't think that the politicians are going to do much more than lip service. But I think that we can put the pressure on them, and we just got to just do action after action and get as many people in the streets as we can.
Who'd like to go next with that same question about how you're feeling under this administration and where should people be putting their energy and their efforts? Michael?
I can I'm such an oddball here. If Trump had won, this would be easier. Because how else do you break capitalism and the Senate and on, you name it? If your team is in power, then you got to give them the benefit of the doubt. You got to give them a chance to fix this, right? But if the other team is just saying, okay, we're going to end taxes and we're going to end government and regulation, then people are going to be like, okay, this system is busted. We have to get out in the street, right? So there's a part of me that says it's going to be harder work because it's a nuanced argument to get somebody off the sofa and to go and confront the system that their team is in charge of. And then I think the other, to go a little further with that, my dream, my vision is that climate change will end when we have a general strike where every person who's in the strike says, I refuse to go back to work for my company until my company stops screwing the planet. And 90% of companies are screwing the planet. So that's going to be everybody like in quarantine, sitting at home, not going and and instead of asking for more pay or more health care or more, safety whatever it is that people ask for in strikes, this is actually asking your company to stop being your company. Boeing can't do this, right? So how do you go on strike and say, when Boeing starts building solutionary rail, I will go back to work, right? But until then, Boeing can kiss my ass. I'm going to sit here in front of Boeing until they stop building planes. But that's what my fairy tale solution to climate change is that people realize I'm not going to go to work to poison my kids anymore. I can't put food on the table and poison their ability to survive anymore. So, yeah, so that's kind of how I feel about Democrats in charge.
And we have a comment that you're not an oddball. And I would say personally that I'm in your camp as well. So, Abby, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's similar to getting off the hook with my church family, is that a lot of people are saying, oh, Biden's in, we have all these good things. But as Greta says, mind the gap, like this is a dangerous place to be because everyone's satisfied that we're making progress, but we're not being faithful to the science. So it's dangerous in that way that a lot of people think that we're okay. So like when Inslee was governor and supposedly the climate governor, we still had to bird dog Inslee and call him out. And I think that tension is helpful, but I also believe that spending too much time in the political realm is like, there's only so much. When you look at how our system, the political system is, and getting reelected and and all the people that you have to be masters to, it just doesn't pencil. Like you could have this amazing politician that's doing the right thing. Are they going to get elected again? I mean, what is the irritation level? Because there are a lot of hard nuts to crack. So I feel like there has to be a mix of the work that you do. Definitely the tension is important, but also like when we all try to decide what we should spend our time on, it's very difficult. Like we get pulled in so many ways. And I think sometimes we're paralyzed because we just don't know which way to choose. So I feel like those that are called to do the political thing should cause tension, but not everybody. I don't feel like we should hang all our hopes on political system.
Right, Bill?
Yeah, I don't think we should hang our hopes on the political system at all. I think that we should lead from the bottom. That the collusion between corporate and elected power doesn't discriminate according to political party, but more than that is that corporations are an easy target at a moment like this. They're just that's an easy place to go back to, because they're the force, the money behind the elected power. But the other place, or the thing that comes to mind, is that we have to shift culture. Like the far right knows this, and I think we need to know this. So we need to shift culture in order for things to mature enough for Michael's vision to manifest, I think. There was a comment from someone about that most people don't consider only 2 states. Hawaii, Jessica says that only 2 states where majority people that think that climate is going to impact them. Well, one of the interesting things about the film was that it captured how the issue of climate and Arctic drilling, that's normally very removed and hard to make it tangible and to motivate people into action, all of a sudden became tangible. And so that was a unique opportunity where climate became something that we could confront in a David versus Goliath fashion, right in our own backyard, in boats on the Salish Sea, which we love, being collaborating with and following the leadership of Indigenous people. And but we don't always get that chance. So I'd say, like, one thing I'd warn against is making everything about climate, even though it is, yeah, sure, it's all about climate, but still make it about people do fight for what they love. They protect what they love, the places they love. So all of these like gigantic cumulative impacts have micro, they're happening in small ways in our own communities. And so I think going after those, fighting those fights where it's local, where it makes a material difference in people's lives and it feels immediate and tangible, and something's threatening something that people already love and like and want to protect. And I think that's really important to draw people in a way that you don't have to have a conversation about 350 parts per billion, That'd be my suggestion.
Right. It reminds me of the saying, when the people lead, the leaders follow. And that's how social change happens. And Michael, you make a great point, because we know, from looking at social transformation, that when you have a certain level of awareness where people understand there's a problem and they support solving that problem, not 100% of people need to get engaged, but you need to have enough people engaged actively together in a concerted action like a general strike, that it will actually have an impact, that it will make a difference. And a lot of the work that I've been doing in recent years is with Latin American countries that have had revolutions, and how they do the organizing, how they build, and how they then mobilize again in the streets. Like, just look at Bolivia recently overthrowing a US coup by basically shutting the country down, blocking all the major highways for weeks and weeks and shutting everything down. And that gave them the political power, so that those people that were in power knew that they couldn't operate. If they didn't do what the people wanted, they couldn't operate. And that's the point we need to build to. But you don't always have those opportunities. Well, you take them when they arise, like when that Arctic drilling rig came into the Seattle, you know, or you have a train track right there, or you have a valve. When you have those opportunities, it's important to take them. But really most of the work in between is just the day-to-day relationship building, community building, awareness building, organizing, you know, the work that doesn't get a lot of that attention. So I was wondering, I guess that we don't have any more questions, and I'm not sure how long we want the conversation to go. But
Another half hour.
oh, another half hour. Okay. All right. Great. So, so somebody has made a comment that we need to promote positive solutions, partnership, reciprocity versus domination, exploitation. So that kind of paradigm shift that we've had some other conversations about. And Bill, you mentioned the poll about just 2 states understanding that the climate crisis is impacting them personally. So just kind of, how do you feel as people have been involved in this work that kind of this level of awareness is amongst the general population? Are people starting to get it about the climate crisis and what it's going to take for us to change it? What are your thoughts, Joe?
Well, I think people understand it. Whether they're moved to take action, and then whether they're moved to take the kind of dramatic action that Michael is suggesting of, you know, putting their job on the line if their corporation doesn't get into, you know, doesn't do the right thing. I thought something like, I went to the Great Climate March in New York City, where 400,000 people marched. There was tremendous energy there, and it created so much optimism. And people who came to that, maybe that was the first time that they were protesting, and suddenly they were drawn into that. And they didn't have another big climate march of that type since then, I think. And I feel like, you know, if we can, I mean, I would love to have, you know, the kind of actions that Extinction Rebellion is putting on. I think those are very effective. I think that, you know, the type of thing that Michael's talking about, if that can happen, I'm indebted to anyone who will take that kind of risk with their, you know, livelihood. But I think that if there was, say, a great march every 3 months, and if you could get, you know, 400,000 people, I mean, I'm not talking in the United States, I'm talking about all over the world on the same day, like the Women's March, or like some of the marches around Black Lives Matter. And if you did it every 3 months and more people got into it, to the point that everyone was in the streets and making it clear that we were not going to stand for the politicians to obstruct our future, to doom, you know, our children and our grandchildren. I mean, I think that they count on the fact that we're going to be passive, that people are going to stay at home and, you know, hope for the best. And, you know, there's going to be a few people like Michael and Abby and Bill who are going to do dramatic things and make hugely important points. But if you could get to a point where absolutely everybody simply gets into the streets and says, we're not going to take this anymore, I think that would show the politicians, hopefully, that they can't take advantage of us and keep pretending like they don't know what's right for our collective future.
Right. I mean, if you look at what happened, the response to the murder of George Floyd last year, and it was actually day after day after day for months that people were coming out into the streets and facing really severe repression. I was so impressed that people were facing that level of repression and they were continuing to come out. And that set an environment that has had ripple impacts in terms of the dialogue in this country, various places around the country trying to take actions to change how things, you know, are going. The fact that there was even a conviction in the murder of the officer and, responsible. Yeah, what you're
Yeah,
saying.
it feels like we've reached a little bit of a tipping point there where maybe, we can count on some more officers, hopefully many more, being held responsible.
Right. Does anybody else want to comment kind of on how you're feeling about the current environment and paradigm, with relation to the climate crisis? Michael.
Very briefly, I'll point people towards Roger Hallam and any of his recent YouTubes, calls to action for Extinction Rebellion UK. Roger Hallam is a PhD strategist, theorist, and his basic sense is that even like what I did was performative, because I shut off this pipeline. 8 hours later, it was turned back on. That was the end of it. So I didn't force anybody to do anything. I didn't force TransCanada to stop doing anything. So the idea that, like the general strike, the idea that you've got to keep coming back, be persistent, like with Black Lives Matter, and the repression and the resistance grow, and that we are not going to persuade or influence political leaders or corporate leaders to walk away from the money on the table. They simply can't do it. So it will be the resistance that refuses to go home. It will be that persistent, constant disruption, interruption of actual commerce that will actually force change or capitulation. And either the protesters will go home or the corporations and the government leaders will go home. Somebody's going to have to give up. So Hallam's got some great talks. The other piece I would say about his talks is that he's very clear. He lays it out. He was an organic farmer. And he says, we're a few years away from mass starvation in developed countries. That this is a very real possibility that nobody's talking about. He has a way of boiling down a few scientific studies and saying, extinction is now. And last week, I think it was last week, endemic species around the world, 95% of endemic species around the world are now facing extinction this century. So I think we do need to take the air out of the room, because we are a very comfortable consumer society. And I don't think people are going to get off the sofa until they realize that their lives are at risk. But I know that's not psychologically. I'm a mental health counselor. I know that's not the way to inspire and motivate people. I think we're beyond, we don't have time.
But also by the time people realize that their lives are at risk, it's going to be too late. I mean, their lives are at risk now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And by the time they realize that, by the time it's obvious, everyone is eventually going to be 100% on board to fight climate change. By that point, though, it's too late.
Right.
So just imagine we're having this panel in 2030.
Yeah.
And do you feel good about the things we're saying today if you're listening to this panel in 2030? Because today's pollution, today's protests, today's decisions that we make are actually going to be cooking the planet in 2030, 2040, 2050.
Right.
Yeah.
I would just want to say what gives me hope is, for me personally, is developing a strong spiritual connection as well. Because I feel like for me, and this is not everybody, but I feel like I'm partnering with a higher power. And so all things are possible because I know I'm not the one driving this boat completely. So that brings me hope in that I do my work and I don't try to do the math, because the math is what it is. And we are going to inspire who we're going to inspire. And I think to continue this work when the math is so bleak you've got to have something to hold on to. So that helps with ego, that helps with hope and encouragement. And the other thing I want to say, still going back to that, I'm still thinking lately about how surprised I was that when Trump was in power, how many people felt empowered to share what they were thinking out loud, and realizing how far we have to go with these people. So how do you have an action where you don't close off and shut down people, but you do something so absurd or with humor or surprise that they might be cracked open. They're drawn to curiosity and be like, what the hell just happened? So I feel like the absurd and humor is kind of the answer. And also it brings joy and fun, which also fuels the spirit. So when we're fighting against, I don't think we have hope of creating a bigger snowball. And I think about the wins that we've had, like we have fought off, we're exhausted, but if we all did not do what we did, then the Pacific Northwest would be like Texas. I mean, literally, we have stopped the flow of fossil fuels to be this natural, long-term, permanent connection to Asia. And I just feel, so we have to also remember our wins. And that took a lot of power. But to think about, like, for example, 350, when it was this tiny little organization at Seattle University in a room, and now it is huge. And there's so many working groups and people have ideas, and there's a crowd of people that you announce your idea and then people say, yeah, I want to work with you. And so I feel like we also have to feel hopeful and cling to the fun, the joy, and the hope. And if you're exhausted, back away for a while, get recharged, and then come back fresh and do the work with joy rather than drag through it, frustrated, angry, weary. That energy you're putting into the group is not helpful. So that's just some things I've been thinking about.
It is a lifelong struggle, and people have to recognize that. You may need to pull back at times. Bill, you?
Abby, you rock.
Yeah, right on, Abby. And I just, I think thank you for reminding of the importance of celebration, because that was an amazing thing that we all collectively helped manifest, over years, right? And there was Shell brought their Arctic drilling rig into Seattle in 2012. And Carlo Voli was like, why isn't anybody doing anything? We didn't have the movement yet, right? We hadn't had all the fights against the coal trains and the bomb trains and such. And it was when 2015 rolled around, it seemed like a natural thing to do. So there was something organically developed there. The other piece is, I think you're absolutely right. I want to see the kinds of actions that Michael did. Michael, you're a freaking inspiration. And I don't think it's just like a tree falling in the forest, nobody heard, And I think that's an affirmation of why Joe's work is so important. The role of storytellers, right? Because if Joe didn't do this movie, how would we know about that? And now what you did, Michael, and the other people, I know it was a good team. There were multiple actions, but what you all did is you inserted something into the collective imagination, something that nobody had imagined before. And you made it, so you took an impossible, you made it possible, like, whoa, this is even something that's an option, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if other affinity groups are inspired by this film and your action and take a turn, right? I think that would be part of the hope. And I think that Abby's absolutely right that if we just do one burnout act thing after another burnout thing, and we're going to look like all a bunch of martyrs, and only certain people with a certain orientation are going to join that movement, and that's not going to be big enough. There has to be beauty, there has to be joy, there has to be celebration, there have to be solutions and awe and humor, and I would say beauty. Like when people see that our actions are a reflection of their aspirations, and their values and their hopes for the future and their feelings of love for community and place and what is not for sale. Like just getting into just like celebrating over and over again, you know, people's lives are not for sale. We can't have a for-profit prison system. Somebody asked in the chat about how we connecting issues. There's all these issues are connected. There's basically a fucking paradigm battle between a paradigm where everything's for sale and a paradigm where nothing of actual importance is for sale. So, you know, paradigm of profit with impunity and a paradigm of the sacred, things that are just not for sale. And I think there's just so many insights that come from all of you people and all this work that we're doing together. And hopefully people will understand that they all of everybody who's listening here has some unique gift to bring. And it might be growing food. It might not be an action, right? It might be a different kind of action, right? It might be telling a story. It might be doing work, connecting their community to the place and the history of their place. It might be restoring salmon in a creek. It might be, you know, there's lots of different ways to be an agent of change. And it is highly relational. And we have to be celebrating not just the activist work, but all these other areas of work and people's fundamental creativity and capacity to solve problems together. I think that is going to help us actually move from where we are now to where we need to be.
And I was wondering, could I just jump in real quick? You know, I became an activist because I showed up at a Backbone meeting the first night that they were planning the Shall No action. And I showed up thinking, well, I've never been in a kayak, so I'm definitely going to be doing the land action. And, you know, they started having these free kayak lessons that I thought, well, what the heck, I might as well go to a free kayak lesson. And like, it started to be fun and ended up finding myself at 4:30 in the morning in a kayak. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do? And they say, like, see the lights of those police boats out there? Just go for that. And they just pushed me into the water. And I became a kayaktivist. And so I just wanted to shout out that that whole summer was magical. And we spent the whole time just building community. And my first taste of activism was saving the planet together is fun. So I just wanted to throw that shout out for Backbone that, the work you guys are doing is great.
Thanks, Sue. And so many people collaborated to make that happen. And part of the process with Shall No, remember, was like, we wanted the oil rig to actually get to Seattle, even though people were protesting it coming into the port. We wanted to get there at a certain point because we wanted to try to stop it from leaving. And then we had to actually, who could have possibly imagine like kayaks stopping that thing from leaving? So we just had to build very gradually, right? We did a blimp saying, join the flotilla, Shall No, and the media covered it. And when they were covering it, we said, join us for a free kayak training, you know, and then they came to the kayak training. And then we had to have the paddle in Seattle, from which that picture is a memory of, because we needed a non-escalated experience on the water for people to practice and to then take pictures of that so they could see themselves in that David versus Goliath moment without actually that thing actually moving. But ironically, it became that photo and on like the front page of the Washington Post or in the New York Times or something, that was brought to the Obama administration's to the White House, and some folks from a regional foundation that does work around climate in Alaska was having a meeting with Obama's office right at that next week, and the person who was normally very friendly from the administration came out very pissed. You know, what are we going to do about this? Because all of a sudden, the climate president who was going to go to Alaska had to answer for why is he allowing 2 Arctic drilling rigs to be going up there? And so And then subsequently, we had to also think, well, if we're going to be on the water, we have to do stuff at night. So then we had to have, low, zero risk things at night. We had to build it gradually so that we could expand the scope of our capacity to imagine our power collectively. And even though things don't always turn out the way you plan, like they didn't in Seattle, things shifted and opportunities appeared in Portland. And Michael was a huge important part of that too. I just want to say, Michael encouraged people to charge out into the river. He's like, he went to each kayaker. He's like, there's going to be a moment when you're going to have to decide. And at that point, go. And so similar to Sue's, like, yeah, just go, just look, see those police lights, go towards that. Michael was encouraging people to take action. And when the Fennica got past all of those people in the river, a lot of people felt disheartened, like, oh, we lost. But we didn't lose. We totally won. We had shifted we made it. So remember when Shell decided they weren't going to do Arctic drilling, they said, we're disappointing results because they'd only had one well rather than two, and who knows what their results were. But the other thing they said is regulatory uncertainty. And that was directly related to the kayakers and the people in the water were reflecting so much of the common people's aspirations and values that they were on the dock chanting, stop that boat, and cheering as they watched Rachel Maddow in the live stream. And we had shifted something. So even though the boat went past and they did their drilling, we still delivered a victory, even though it didn't feel like a victory at that moment. So that's another thing, I think, if we just take really beautiful, principled action, that I think that we actually shift the political calculus. We change what's possible, and we make the impossible possible, or we make the inevitable impossible. But we do that by being unassailably beautiful, awe-inspiring, and sometimes humorous in our work.
And I think it's really important that we recognize that when we do have these victories, it's very rare that we're actually given the credit for the victories, that usually the corporations will make some sort of excuse about, well, it's this that we have to stop. They would never say that it's our protest, but we have to recognize the role that these actions do play and the ripple effects that you never know. Some small action that you may take can strike somebody in some way or have an impact in some way that ripples out. I want to quickly get back to something specific about the film that we've got some questions about, and that actually I was struck by. Joe and Abby. Joe, you were able to get access to the courtroom to film Abby's trial. That seems amazing to me that you were able to do that. But the importance of why did you feel like you needed to include that? And Abby, you showed a very vulnerable moment in that, when you were on the witness stand for the first time. Maybe you could talk about, why it was important to show people that and how it felt to be sharing something that personal. But Joe, let's start with you.
I think something very important can be seen through these court cases about, how what this state allows and doesn't allow, and how they look at, who has the rights. And, the corporations can do, I think Michael said it so well, you can do anything that puts the planet at risk, and, you pay no price. But if you try to stop it, then you go to jail. So I think there's a dynamic that's captured in a court case that tells you a lot about how the society, where it stands in this fossil fuel equation and question. For Abby's trial, I was very lucky. I think the trial judge was sympathetic to this whole concept from the beginning. Although he didn't give the necessity defense, he was open to the thought of it, and he allowed us to have two camera people in the courtroom, and I gave each camera person 2 cameras. So we had 4 cameras. We had great coverage. On the other hand, in freaking North Dakota, they didn't want to help us at all. They would grudgingly let 1 camera be there, and they didn't want a sound person or anybody to be mic'd. And so we didn't get as his beautiful images, but I think we got the story, and we got Michael telling his statement, which was so powerful when he was about to be sentenced. So that's why I wanted to get it, and I think it's a huge part of this film, an important part of this film.
Abby, can you quickly comment on that part of the film?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it wasn't Abby's trial. It was the Delta 5. And what's so grateful about that is that I had a mental breakdown, but there were 4 others that testified beautifully. And so it wasn't all on me, except for I feel like the person in a Super Bowl that missed the catch, like the winning catch that just had to go over the line, because I felt like I knew what I needed to say to have Judge Howard acknowledge that there were no other options, that the timing was bad. I didn't say that the political system, I made it sound like, oh, I'm going to keep trying. But really, the political system is incapable of doing what they need to do. So you had to prove that there's no other way. But the other important thing that I want to say that was the good thing about that trial was, first of all, Judge Howard, that's the other thing, is he was the most amazing judge that if it were ever to happen, it would have happened in that courtroom, because Judge Howard agreed to the cameras in there. He said, this is the people's court. He allowed, there were so many people, it was overwhelming how many supporters were there coming in and out of the courtroom, that he allowed it to be open and slightly chaotic. And all the people that worked in the courthouse were blown away. And like, even the trial transcripts were purchased by like 10 people, and they could not, the cashier was just like, this doesn't happen. This is so weird. And they let us scout out the room, and the deputy was like, oh, you want to like scout it out and see how many sit here? Like, this is a small sleepy courtroom. He allowed us to move from Everett to this larger courtroom, and he had to shift his schedule around. That's again where you have to realize it's not about one person doing something to save it, but it's about the whole community actually changing the people that were affected and just in their day-to-day. The jury was amazing. And the foreman, he's Joe, and he's in a band, and we still Facebook about his music, and Patrick's gone to see him, I think. And so I feel like change, it feels frustrating to change one person at a time, or 50 people at a time, but like, that's what I felt like was the biggest thing that happened, is this deeper connection and knowing that everybody has your back. This community is so huge and big. I also just want one more shout out to Backbone, where that is where I learned to climb, and that's where I met all the people for Delta 5, which I knew nobody. I knew none of the people that I worked with, but by the end of it, I would trust them with my life. And so it's amazing. Okay.
I'd like to add one thing to that. So Abby had this moment where she was a little tongue-tied, but she came back, and people have told me that it's kind of more exciting because she had trouble expressing herself, and then she comes back and she did an amazing job of saying what she needed to say. But also, a lot of people identify with Abby in that moment. And I think in a documentary film, people don't only identify with people because of some super heroic moment. They also identify with people because of their vulnerability. They connect with people because of their vulnerabilities. And so a lot of people have asked me all the time about that moment in the courtroom, but they are drawn to Abby. And so she makes a very powerful statement because she comes across as very human, very vulnerable, and very honest.
I want to thank you, Joe, for making this film and for being part of this panel this evening, and thank the participants who were in the film for your courage and your work, and for being here today to share your experiences with the audience. And I really want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch the film today and participate or listen to this panel. And please know that this is an important tool for the climate movement. This film is very powerful because it will inspire people to take action and show how ordinary people can move outside of their comfort zone and take very effective action, with the support of their communities. So I do encourage people to, spread the word about this film, do whatever you can to share about this film and empower people to do more. So I want to thank you all for the conversation today. Very important.